So hey, last year I created this car render for the Hum 3D Car Challenge 2019. For this render I'm exploring something completely new to me, destruction of cars. Apart from that, I also had to model and shade a realistic F1 vehicle, and do characters and environments and nature and crowds. And I basically had no idea how to do any of this. But I would like to take you with me through the process of this project, starting out breaking down the cars in this video. But hey, let's just get started. So to start out, let's take a look at Senna's car from this scene. So to add some extra details to the mesh, I quickly figured out that the Boolean modifiers are great at making all these small holes on the body. The problem, however, is the performance. So I found a quick little hack which can actually disable all the Booleans at once, so you would have a very quick preview. So what you need to do is to go to the Scene tab and then add a custom property. Now you can name this Enable Bool or something like that. And then you right click and pick Copy as New Driver. Now you go back to your modifiers and then just paste this driver on the viewport visibility of all your Boolean modifiers. In the end, I also have a bevel modifier just to bevel the edges of the Boolean holes. And I also like to add it on that one, just because the bevel modifier can also be pretty heavy on the performance as well. So now when I go back into the Scene tab, I can enable and disable the Booleans very quickly. Maybe you already know this video from the Blender Conference 2017, where Gleb Alexandrov he introduced people to primary, secondary and tertiary shapes. I found this video so informative and so good, and I always try to think about it when I'm modeling, composing a scene, or just whatever I do, because I think contrasts are so important in so many aspects of art. To explain it quickly, the idea is that you will have 3 levels of details on your model. The primary shape, which I interpret as the silhouette of the model, then you need some secondary shapes, which also contribute to the shape of the car, and then in the end tertiary shapes, which are small details that you can kind of discover on the car. I also found that just adding some cables here makes it look much nicer. And to be honest, this part in here was a bit dark, so you couldn't really see what was in there, as long as there was just some detail and some different parts. So because of that, I just reused a lot of the parts. And as you can see, all these poles are kind of the same mesh, just duplicated and changed up a bit. For the holes in the body, I used the bevel, like I mentioned before, because I think even though the bevel is so small, it still adds a little bit of extra detail. If you have razor sharp edges on a surface, you'll never get the same reflections. So when I was shading the car, I used the awesome material preview to quickly get a result. And even though the final picture was rendered in cycles, the material preview was very close to that and helped me a lot to create the materials more quickly. Instead of making all the detail on a UV texture, I did a lot of the graphics inside Blender. I used a couple of empties to control some gradient nodes, which generated these lines on the car. This allowed me to very quickly just change the lines and make another version of this car. So actually, the 2 different cars in the scene is just the same car, just reskinned. So when you've made your black and white mask, you can just add 2 color nodes and mix them depending on the mask. I also like to use some layer weight or Fresnel nodes to add this kind of black fall off on the car. I don't think it's so realistic, but I think it adds a bit more contrast to the shader. All the stickers were mapped on the UVs of the car, and I just created 2 different sets of stickers inside Photoshop, one for Senna's car and one for Comas's car. So for a lot of my car materials, I also used these water lines, which I just created a node grip for. So the way the effect is made is just with some images that I modified in Photoshop, and then I just mix it all together with some box mapping. To make the effect that water has been running down the paint, I usually just lower the value of the paint where the water has been running down. You can also affect the roughness channel, so you would make the other parts of the mesh more rough and make the parts where the water has been running down the mesh with the roughness of 0. So now we have a very nice base of our car paint, but most car paints they have a clear coat on top. So a clear coat is basically another layer. I think of it as some kind of glass which is like wrapped over the car. So it's completely reflective and it's just sitting on top of the other reflection. I have a custom node which generates this clear coat for me, but you can also generate it in the printable shader. I think the printable shader probably is more accurate, but I still like to use this custom node because I feel like it gives me a better result. The node was not made by me, it was made by Syndicate Pro, who made a tutorial a long time ago about how to do a PBR setup before the printable shader was implemented in Blender. So a new node that was recently added in Blender is the ambient inclusion node, and I love it. So for this project I used it and just multiplied it with a nice grunge texture I found off of the Megascans library, and it gave me a really nice result with some tweaking. I also added these lines in the body. They were basically just painted inside Blender and then UV mapped onto the car. Then I just plugged them into the displacement to get these body lines in the car. So one other thing I would like to show you is how I made this text appear damaged, because I actually made that effect in Blender. So what you need is the text and then the text layer on top, just a little bit blurred. Then you can just take a grunge texture and then soft light the grunge texture on top of your blurred text image. The blur only appears in the edges, then the grunge will also only appear in the edges when you use the soft light. Then I also multiplied the grunge texture on top just to remove even more of the text. So for the other car, there is a lot more going on. I scattered some of the objects off the front wheel to make it appear like the car had crashed. And all these objects, they're kind of just placed in there, and even though it doesn't look good from here, it looks good from the camera. And that's the only thing that matters. For these bars, I just took the original mesh and then just used a knife tool to cut what I thought looked like the shape that the bar would crack in. Then I just triangulated the top face, sharpened the edges, and deleted some of the edges. That was basically it. So let's move to the back of the car. For the spoiler, I used the deform modifiers and then just deformed the mesh a little in edit mode too. So I split up the deformation in the y-axis and the x-axis to make it easier to control them. I also used weight paint to manage where the deformation would happen. In the end, I added a subdivision surface on top to make the metal look like it was bent, but not look like it was cracked. I also liked to tell small stories with the deformations and destruction of this car. So I was kind of imagining that this bar from the front wheel maybe had collided with the ground and was kind of pushed up through the body of the car. Then I made this small crack in the material and just moved the bar to that position. I also did the same thing in the front of the car, where it looked like it had been hitting something and then the front was kind of ripped open a bit. So the way I made this effect was with a texture from the Megascans library and then just some hand painting in Blender. I multiplied the hand painting and the texture together to create a mask for myself. I used the mask both to drive the displacement and the transparency. So that was it for the first breakdown video. I learned a bunch of stuff from working on this project, and I hope to share as much as possible with you guys. But hey, until next time, Daniel is out.